So you can start.
All right, good. Good afternoon and welcome to all of you tuned in to day one of Charcha 2020. Charcha is such an interesting word, and it has always been something that's been a critical ingredient to all change processes. We all know how central Addas were, if you've heard of that word, to the birth of genius and the entire culture in Calcutta. And Charcha has become even more important when we find ourselves in a state of chaos like we do today in the wake of the pandemic. The strange thing I find is that we see charcha or chaos, not charcha, chaos as a bad thing and something that must be avoided at all costs. But I thought it would be interesting to share an experiment that was done by this neurologist called Walter Freeman. He, at a certain point of time, attached electrodes to the brains of rabbits to expose them to a variety of new odors or smell. Some of this was old that they were familiar with, and some new. What was really interesting through this neurological experiment was when confronted with a new odor, something that the rabbit did not recognize, the rabbit's brain entered into a state which is called the I don't know state of being. And this chaotic well or state of mind forced the brain almost to avoid all its previously known or learned activities and produce a new one and almost form new neural connections. And this has been validated several times by different neurologists. Different experiments have shown that rats that are raised in chaotic or stimulus-rich environments develop more cortical neurons in their brains, and in fact almost have brains that are heavier than other rats. So in many ways, if we see the pandemic, despite the huge costs it's imposing on society, and especially the impact it's having on many, many marginalized sections of the society is potentially the ingredient and impetus we needed to push ourselves into a state of creativity and to reimagine a different future. And COVID has triggered that chaos into our world. It's pushed a lot of our systems and us as individuals equally into the I don't know state of being, where we aren't really sure what tomorrow is going to look like, 5 months later is going to look like, and whether we'll get back into the old order or will we see an order that's completely new from what we were familiar with, right? And the courts are really not different from any other institution. In many ways, it feels like this institution that will never change its shape or form. But the last few weeks have shown that COVID has also necessitated a bunch of changes, not necessarily trigger it. It cannot singularly act as it, but made us surface and make more visible what potential changes need to happen and how we might need to reimagine the future of courts in that context. Today, I have with us Justice Ravindra Chavan, who was the judge with the Mumbai High Court, and Sajjan Puvvaiah, a senior advocate in Bangalore, both incredible individuals with rich years of experience in the practice of law with us, and who have their own insights and experience to both the ongoing efforts and change that the courts are undergoing, who will share with us, and we'll have a conversation around the impact of COVID on courts. What are some of the ongoing efforts and opportunities to tide over the crisis, but equally to reimagine how our courts can function to serve justice better? I am Supriya from Agami, an organization based in Bangalore that advances ideas that serve justice. And the way we do this is by identifying ideas, incredible ideas that have the ability to transform our systems of law and justice. We help reframe them. We help bring the people needed together from across disciplines and sectors to catalyze collaborative action. Two of our initiatives, collaborative initiatives, have been on online dispute resolution and data for justice challenge. And we also run what's called the Agami Prize and the Summit, through which we identify, celebrate, and amplify innovations that are changing our field of law and justice. Over today and tomorrow, we're curating a range of interesting conversations on justice. These include one later this evening on collaborative mechanisms to resolve disputes, which may seem like an oxymoron, but work is showing that is possible. the work and how we can make sure rights and entitlements reach every citizen and make every rupee count. And the last session is around media innovations on the front lines of justice. I'm sure you all have access to the speakers. We have an incredible lineup, and please tune in to join them. We have LiveLaw as our media partner for this track at Chacha 2020. And just before we get down to speaking, I'd like to dedicate this session to a teacher, a lawyer, a change maker, an activist, and a friend for many of us, Shamnath Bashir. Shamnath, someone was just asking me to say who he was, and I was struggling. Truth be told, I think he was just a force of nature. He embodied the ethics and politics and spirit we all aspire to have every day. He was better known to have founded Spicy IP and IDIA, which was increasing diversity in law schools. We lost him a little less than a year, and today happens to be his birthday. And we thought we would love to dedicate this session to him and to draw from his inspiration to show up a little better in this world. So without further ado, and to toasting to Shamnath and the incredible life he led, let's dive into Charcha. Sajan, I'd like to start with you. We've heard as a citizen that COVID has, of course, impacted courts. They have resorted to hearing urgent matters through video conferencing. But would you be able to tell us a bit more about what its impact on courts has been, and what the reality has been in courts, both at the higher level and the lower courts over the last few weeks?
Thank you, Supriya. It's actually an honor to be speaking at a session which is now for today named after Shamnath, who is a dear friend, a great human being, and I think his contributions to serving justice has been far more than many I have known. Now, coming to COVID, I'd really like, given the wide-ranging audience who are listening to what we're speaking, I'd like to actually share a few of my life's instances, what has happened post the COVID pandemic in India. Now, in February, or until February 2020, my life as a senior advocate was only running between court halls, running between courts, running between cities, running between city capitals, and trying to actually, in some form or the other, trying to brag that I have finished 3 high courts in one day. So we have, flown from point A to point B and finished our arguments, etc., etc. So at some point of time, I thought, what is this? This is a Forrest Gump situation. You're just running. And consequently, in a 24-hour day, you're possibly effectively contributing maybe an hour and a half or maybe 2 hours or 3 hours at most for the law, and the rest of it for basically logistics. So we were more logistics experts than lawyers, come to think of it, before COVID. Now, the one thing that has occurred, and if it has touched my life, as I'm just one lawyer in whatever, almost 0.8 million lawyers that are practicing in this country. If it has touched my life, I believe it has touched many other lawyers' lives too. Now, what's happened post the COVID situation is, one, our courts have been faster than ever to embrace video conferencing technology, or just embrace technological platform for the justice dispensation process that they ought to do, number one. Number two, the lawyers that are involved in matters as well have, I think, embraced technology much faster than what I thought they would. And therefore, sometimes I think COVID has been some sort of an enabler, if I can say so, in terms of at least an enthusiastic enabler for the judicial dispensation process to move from a physical brick and mortar structure to the online world. I'll just give one illustration. Yesterday, I appeared in 4 different courts, sitting in the comforts of my senior counsel chamber. It was between the apex court, between a national tribunal in Delhi, between 2 high courts, one in the south, one in Kerala, and one in Telangana. It was all seamless. Today, for example, I appeared in a final hearing matter. It's not some emergent, small 10-minute hearing. A final hearing matter before the National Appellate Tribunal for Electricity, where 3.5 hours of arguments were heard on some crucial aspect of whether a particular relation to a power aspect or a regulatory aspect on electricity should or should not be interpreted in a particular manner. And all this has happened in the last, 6-8 weeks. And therefore, I think post the COVID situation, the one thing that we are now clear is, in the presence of specific protocols, in the presence of appropriate apparatus that is available, and in the presence of specific and possibly short form training that can be given to the bar, and to that extent to the bench and also to the registry, moving the justice dispensation process from a brick and mortar world to the virtual technology world is certainly not difficult, not impossible at any count. And in this entire scenario, the biggest beneficiary, if I can call it so, has been the lawyer himself. Because in a good part of the day that you travel between airports and courts and wait for your matters, etc., effectively here in a 8-hour day, you have rendered good service to your clients in terms of debating or arguing the law for 6 full hours. And that, I think, is the qualitative difference that COVID has made to a lawyer's life, provided you're willing to jump that threshold and move towards technology.
Thank you so much. That's interesting to hear that lawyers, you saw yourself as more a logistics expert than a legal mind. And, and this is something Professor Susskind also keeps talking about, Richard Susskind, to say how courts move from being a place. The first idea when we hear the word court is to create a visual of a big space that we need to enter, but to seeing it as a service that can be rendered from anywhere to anywhere. And a lot of what Sajal spoke to alludes to that. Justice Chavan, if I can ask you to share, I'm sure your vantage point is also broader, and I'm also cognizant that this might not be the reality for every lawyer and every court in the country to have been moved this way. So we'd love for you to shed a bit more light on what its implications has been from where you see. You'll have to unmute yourself, sir.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We can hear you now.
You can hear me, okay. So it was heartening to listen to senior advocate Sajjan Povaiya say that his rushing from one airport to another has been reduced because of Corona. Mm. I wish all the advocates, senior advocates who are actually depriving many courts of their wisdom, take up this seriously, and in a day they can complete 3 or 4 hearings in different courts sitting in their own offices. Mm-hmm. That should also reduce the cost of lawyering, because when a senior advocate travels, say, from Delhi to Bangalore or to Bombay, the cost for travel and cost for stay is also included, and the lawyer also charges for the time which is spent in traveling, isn't it? If you can do more cases, from the comfort of your office, that's really good. That will bring down the cost of lawyering for common man. The services of these seniors would be available to greater number of people. This also opens up an opportunity to youngsters who would have otherwise found it difficult to settle at a big place, though they have the ability to articulate their arguments, though they have studied law well, though they have capacities of research, but they can't because of inadequacy of means. If they can't set up a practice in a big place, still they can do that. Advocate Sajjan Povaiya will agree that a large number of cases are filed in the Supreme Court from belt around Delhi. It's not that people in Tamil Nadu or Karnataka agree to suffer injustice. They don't want to go to Delhi to knock the doors of the Supreme Court. It's not that both the high courts, Madras or Karnataka, are doing perfect justice and Delhi High Court is dishing out something which is rubbish. So the distance, which is a hindrance, which causes an obstacle in course of justice, has been removed because of this Corona. As Supriya said, when you learn something, when you learn a path, your brain doesn't grow. But when a new situation confronts you, you think of many different things and your brain also grows, finds out solutions. So therefore, I suppose this will reduce the cost of Corona, will reduce the cost of lawyering. It will make better legal services available to the common man everywhere. And lawyers will also find it more comfortable to address from the comfort of their office rather than standing before a court. Yeah. Most of the time, the senior advocate will agree that most of the time he spends in the court is waiting for the case to be called. So that time is in fact wasted. if he can schedule the cases one after the other from his office, then he can do more work, more meaningful work. This corona has impacted the humanity in a big way. As far as we are concerned in India, it has impacted all aspects of life. The passive champions of freedoms, liberties, human rights, and privacy have surrendered their freedoms and have confined themselves to their houses. And those who really never had any freedoms, those who were living in prisons, outside the prisons, had to leave their crowded barracks and seek freedom by walking towards their own homes, succumbing to all sorts of exploitation, being exposed to all sorts of miseries. But still, they flew from the cages in which they were imprisoned. So they became free birds. So this is a big change that has happened in their lives. And the bewildered state, Agami has brought out a working paper on e-courts. They have said that we are masters of knee-jerk responses. So the bewildered state is coming out with knee-jerk responses, not knowing what is good for its subjects. Anyway, this is what happens. In this past few months, past few weeks, we have seen so much of reactions in life, so much of change, that what is good, what is just, what is unjust, the line between just and unjust has also been blurred. Sometimes we have started accepting what in fact would have been unjust. For example, police caning those who breach prohibitory orders, a flagrant breach of all human rights, publicly shown on the TV screens. But we feel that yes, it's okay, fine. Police should be doing that, isn't it? Just as
so, if I can ask you there, Justice Chauhan, in the context of all of that, and I definitely, we all have a deep appreciation for the challenge that the court has before it to be able to move into this mode. But given the pandemic and sometimes the challenges in justice itself it throws up, what has been your sense of the court's ability? Like, for example, are courts able to hear the same number of matters they did before? I did hear Sajjan speaking about, the speed, like, they're able to hear them faster and move. But if we had to take an estimate of, are they operating at full or half or quarter capacity now? And what is the reality, especially in, we know the Supreme Court, High Courts, and a few tribunals have managed to go online, but at least like my conversations with a few lawyers in smaller districts say that everything is working as usual. Things, they're just standing 6 feet apart from each other and doing filings, and very few urgent matters are being able to be heard. So, what is also your sense of the trickle down effect? Like, how is this reality able to pan out for the country, both in the short term and long term? And how do you see courts being able? What is the reality today? It would be great to hear your perspective on that.
See, this caning by people we have accepted, or people making those who breach prohibitory orders do sit-ups and they are displayed on the public. We have accepted that because we know that courts will not be able to punish them. Courts will not punish them. In fact, this is an extension of the Hyderabad Police Commissioner's justice, the encounter which took place, which is being inquired into by some committee. So people have started believing that courts will not deliver, and therefore this type of justice by policemen is fine. So in fact, time for Amartya Sen's idea of justice to be revised now. What is just or what is unjust is extremely situational, and people have started accepting some things which are not correct. So as you said now about what is happening in courts, in the last 50 days, the courts have been working only to the extent of 10% of their capacity. Okay, most of the courts, otherwise also the capacity of the courts is inadequate. But even that inadequate capacity is not fully used. Only 10% of the courts have been functioning properly. courts have allowed 90% of the work to pile up. I was happy to note that Advocate Povaiya said that he argued a final hearing before an electricity tribunal. That's great. But otherwise, give aside final hearings, even matters which may be urgent from the litigant's perspective or the lawyer's perspective are not taken up by the courts. So 90% of the work is piling up has been piling up in the last 50 days or so. The institution has also reduced. In trial courts, the institution is down to 1,640 from about 8,800 per day.
Okay.
So it's almost down by 80%. So it's not that people don't have any problems or people don't have any issues, but the message that is conveyed, and lawyers may forgive me for saying this, that common man may perceive that courts and black courts and bigwigs are thoroughly irrelevant. Their absence or the courts not being functioning has not mattered to the common man. So if this impression continues, then we are in for a big trouble. So lawyering as a profession will itself suffer. That's not so. That's a extreme view which I just put forth. But we need to do something. We need to ensure that we do not become irrelevant. We do not become useless. So therefore, let us try to impress upon people that even in the lockdown, even in the restraints that we are suffering, we work. We allow the adjudicated processes to go ahead with whatever restrictions we suffer. If we do this, then again people will have some faith in the system. Otherwise, no. We believe that we are doing very well. Yeah. Common man does not believe. Yeah. Common man comes to the court only when he is pushed to coming to the courts. So therefore, I suppose is this being hosted in Bangalore? No. Sorry. This webinar is being hosted from Bangalore.
People can be anywhere. That's the advantage of being on.
Justice Ravindran long ago said that people have no faith in the system, and therefore the institution on civil side is getting down, declining every day. People don't come to civil courts. So this situation could change because of Corona. Because of Corona, we could inject speed in the process of doing justice. We would realize that what are the bottlenecks, and we'll try to remove them. Does this answer your question?
It does. Thank you. And that
long answer.
Not a
long answer, which would be more viewed as obfuscatory, okay, and would not earn any marks in an examination.
Not at all. I think there were some terrifying facts that you shared around both the capacity and access of courts right now. And I think for me, what has been interesting to hear is when I'm hearing Sajjan, I'm hearing the higher potential of what might be possible, and to say this is what might be there. But of course, in a quick, short period of time, in the transitionary phase, there are going to be severe costs to both the volume of the cases, maybe who is heard and who is not heard in a situation like this, and who might have access to courts. So, Sajjan, given this, given that you do see what the higher potential is, and we are cognizant of the reality that it's not like a hunky-dory story where, like, it's easy for someone today, especially in a smaller area, to get their matters listed, whether that's a case of, bail or, domestic violence, or like a case of, everything from the criminal to the civil side. What are the opportunities you see for courts to be able to do more? We know that today they have, the courts are working on an e-filing system, to be able to launch the next version of it. We know that different courts are taking efforts to be able to adopt different technologies, but what more needs to be done?
Supriya, okay, I have some views on the whole concept of digital society in India, but I'll not bring that here. I'm sure as we go on in this webinar, we'll have an opportunity to speak on the digital divide later on. But now I'm just taking this question as it is on face value. I'm just looking at the scenario of access to justice and justice dispensation process itself. Permit me to be a little negative in terms of, or a little critical if I can and be so. No, let's not forget it. Pre-COVID, everything was not hunky-dory. It is not pre-COVID that every citizen had great access to justice in this country, that he could actually go up, find a lawyer, the next morning his matter would be heard, and like some quote unquote super specialist matters will be heard overnight, and the richer you are, the chances of you getting bail are greater. Now, those are thought processes which are already ingrained in society. That a famous actor can get bail overnight, but possibly a normal human being living in the suburbs of the same city would possibly have to wait for weeks in end for his bail matter to be heard. Now, therefore, pre-COVID, everything was not hunky-dory. Access to justice was a problem even pre-COVID. But there was little that could be done easily to increase that access to justice, because what you are building on is this brick and mortar structure, which was heavy, which was slow, which was time consuming, and which was not cost effective. And therefore, to build a greater access or accessibility to justice took time, took money, took a mindset issue, etc., etc. Then comes COVID. Now, please look at the silver lining there. Now, COVID forces you to move away from this huge brick and mortar situation, which has the trappings of its own bureaucracy. The judiciary also has its own bureaucracy, let's be clear about it, which has the trappings of inefficiencies in its registry. And that is moved now to an online platform. I would really think, and please permit me now to be super positive, I think today, a normal human being sitting in the second suburb of the third tier city has possibly faster access to justice through a technological platform if the court is hearing the matter online. Let me take an example. For a matter to be heard in the Supreme Court for admission of an SLP, the matter would be listed. Because of an efficient system, it would get listed in 1 week or at most in 2 weeks after filing. But then a lawyer had to travel, let us say, from Cochin all the way to Delhi the previous night and be in court for a 2-minute hearing or a 3-minute hearing for the SLP to be noticed and notice to be issued or to be dismissed. And the lawyer then goes back to Cochin, effectively taking the whole day. Now, why is that? Now, today, because we have virtual courts, the same SLP hearing can happen with the same lawyer sitting back in Cochin, arguing the matter, and the same 3 minutes or 4 minutes or 5 minutes of time being given, and effectively the same result being achieved. Which means cost of lawyering for that gentleman to come to Delhi and go back, as compared to arguing the matter in his chambers, is far lower, and the cost of lawyering being lowered itself increases access to justice. Number one. Number two, I'll come to the Mofussil courts later on. But when it comes to the superior courts, and I mean the high courts and the Supreme Court and the national tribunals, the fact that they have moved to an online platform and virtual courts are being conducted, in fact, increases access to justice to people in the far-flung areas. Yes, Justice Ravindra Chauhan is right. Why does 60% of the matters to the Supreme Court go from Delhi or from the NCR region? Not because the courts in NCR region are wrong and decisions have gone in. Simply because people in the NCR region find access to the Supreme Court far easier than somebody who's sitting in Manjeri in Kerala or Coorg in Karnataka. And therefore, that divide in terms of space, that spatial divide and inaccessibility is going down. And therefore, I believe as a lawyer that we are, of course, in the transitionary phase now. We need to, of course, work towards making sure that we, as I said, have a uniform protocol, stable platform, lawyers get onto it faster, the judicial registry system gets onto it faster. Then I think the net result is easier, cheaper, and faster access to justice for at least to the common man who lives in a remote area of the country. Supriya, I can't hear you.
Any better now?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's actually interesting, and this is something that we forget, that access to justice wasn't necessarily I was trying to find data, but I don't know if we have a clear point of what percentage of the Indian population actually access courts, or how many would not even go to courts because of how overwhelmingly complex and expensive and time consuming the process was. So that's really valuable perspective to bring back, Sajan. But let me ask you a couple of things, right? Currently, the focus has been a lot on video conferencing and e-filings, but a lot of the things that you speak about, which are the case registry or protocols, etc., are what would call beneath the surface, and is not something, at least on media, we are hearing about. Could you elaborate a bit more on what that actually means and why you think it's important?
No, let me demystify it from a perspective, given of course this wide range of audience that we have. Let me demystify it from a perspective and make sure that we don't speak technology in terms of technology language, which again further mystifies the whole thing. When you're looking at a court, Why is that? You look at a fact that it must be a public space, it must be large, it must have multiple access, it must have multiple ingress, egress, you must have the registry at a particular location, the registry officers must be numbered in a particular manner, that you know which room actually gives you what, you know which court hall is where. Now, all of that is simply because you demystify the entire system of justice dispensation and have access availability in a brick and mortar system. That you know where the filing registry is, you know where the registry for processing the matter is, you know where the board branch for listing is, you know where objections can be removed, you know where the lawyers' chambers are, you know where the judges sit, and therefore you pan yourself through that myriad of officers and end of the day get something called justice. And therefore, it is that exact physical demystification of justice delivery which happens in the online world as well. What we need, and you're so right, Supriya, simply getting onto an online platform and having video conferencing hearings is good, welcome, very welcome. But that itself is not going to change the accessibility to justice or access to justice in the digital world. That's a small segment. It possibly is the tip of the iceberg, what is visible to the world. Now, a good deal of work happens prior. How should I file a matter digitally? In what format? Now, you know that in a physical world, you will file it in A4 size paper or legal paper, one side, two side, 1 inch margin, and you will stitch it in a particular thread. You will not staple it, otherwise office will reject it. All of that is available in the physical world. Please put it to the electronic world. Should I file it as a Word document? Should I file it as a PDF document? Should it be meta tagged? Should it be bookmarked? Should I have them in multiple formats? That is what we need. We need a digital protocol on the filing, number one. Number two, that filing protocol must be such that once a particular file is initiated in court at the trial level, it is only logical that most of those matters will ultimately go up to the appellate level in the High Court and then to the Supreme Court at the special level, etc. The format must be such that it will interoperate and flow seamlessly between the trial courts to the appellate courts to the constitutional courts, etc., etc. So that you don't have to replicate filings. Second, an appellate court hearing a matter should not really be asking for physical documents to reach it. It may, the click of a button, if there is a uniform protocol for filing, can pull out the documents from the registry of the trial court without the documents leaving the trial court at all. The document can be at 3 different courts at the same time and authenticated. Third, what should lawyers do? What is the platform that lawyers must use in their chambers? Why should it be that I have a Word document in my chamber, but when I have to put it on a court platform, it must be in a particular format. Therefore, I change the format and pull it out on a physical media, which I call a thumb drive. I simply put that I transfer it from an electronic media to a physical media, then go and give it to the court, and court then in turn puts it on electronically. Why can't you have a system where lawyers, officers, and chambers and their systems seamlessly interoperate, of course, with adequate security protocols, seamlessly interoperate with the court registries as well. I can file, not file, etc. particularly if I actually follow a protocol. Now, that registry protocol is the most important aspect that we need to do. They are the building blocks. That's the foundation. Unless you have a foundation, you really can't build the first floor without really having the ground floor intact. And you can't have the ground floor intact without the foundation intact. If we achieve the registry processes on a seamless, uniform, or at least unified protocol with idiosyncrasies providing for the nitty-gritties of every region, an application may be a miscellaneous application in a region, it may be a civil application in another region, a writ petition may be a petition somewhere, it may be a civil miscellaneous, a criminal miscellaneous application somewhere. So these are issues which every court, based on its high court rules or the trial court rules or the civil court rules, have their own idiosyncrasies or have their own genesis in terms of historical genesis. So long as you integrate them, you don't need to unify them. One India need not have one unified process. It shouldn't. We are a diverse country, and justice dispensation should take care of that diversity. But if you can integrate this process into a common platform and have a common dashboard, so to speak, I think it will be seamless and it is not difficult to do.
Fantastic. Thank you. That felt like a 101 class on, on what technology at a backbone level can be. And I think that's a really valuable perspective because at least as a person interested in this space, I've been seeing at least, if not 100% of the conversation has focused on thinking digital courts equals video conferencing, which it isn't because unless we have these foundational capabilities, to do that at scale and to do that efficiently will not be possible. But equally to sort of recognize, and I'd love to hear both your views on it, that when we're thinking about digital courts, we're not necessarily saying there is no offline element to it, because I think that I have heard to be a very, very critical concern, that are we talking about moving it from one extreme to the other extreme, or is it talking about creating, like you say, the digital capabilities to allow for this, to allow for access, but retaining components of it? So I'd love to hear both your views on that. Are we talking about moving everything online and every case in the future being heard, being filed only online and only through heard conferences, or what do you see as the blended way to be?
You're asking me?
Both of you can answer this. This question is to both of you. Yes, okay. You can start and I can go back.
I entirely agree with Advocate Povaiya. And your working paper also mentions this, that what we want is, we want to maintain the diversity between various high courts, etc. Whatever systems are developed, we don't want to obliterate them. We want to ensure that they are retained, and then still there is a sort of uniform protocol for doing all this. We are working on it, and we have also released, I suppose I have shared it with you also, about e-filing. We have done something, but we need to do a lot about it. The question which you asked, no, are we going to do away with physical filing? No, we are just creating this capability. That is, those who want may file it digitally from their offices. Those who can't, they can come with their physical documents to the court or physical petitions to the court, and we would have them digitized. Because as Advocate Povaiya said, it has to seamlessly move from lowest court to the Supreme Court also, isn't it? So for this, we will create that change.
Fantastic.
But then this is a capacity this is a capability which we are trying to build up, so that, as Advocate Povaiya said, you don't have to take it in a pen drive and carry it to the court. It can be filed online. And I suppose in your working paper you have said about forms. You have said about forms which can be filled online, and those can create templates. Those documents get tagged to the court registry. So I suppose we are working on proper track. Means after hearing Advocate Povaiya, I felt that the e-committee is not off the track. We are trying to cater to what people want. Yeah, please.
No, it's great to hear. Those are already ideas that you're working with and in progress.
No, they are not our ideas. We got them from all of you.
Yeah, no, but that's really, really great to hear.
We are just working on them.
Sajjan, is there anything you have to say about blending the online, offline? And I'd like to ask you, before we open to Q&A, we have some very, very interesting questions. Justice Chaman spoke about what this might mean for lawyering, how it, and even you spoke about how it will reduce costs, etc. But equally, if we can just touch upon the question of digital divide and answer that question of what it might need for us to, if at all, retain elements of the physical along with the virtual. It would be good to hear your insights before I jump into the questions.
I think, Supriya, these two aspects, I must commend you. You brilliantly brought both of those aspects. They actually interoperate, these two issues. The digital divide in one space, and whether you can actually supplant a physical court system with a virtual court, and is that even possible? Let me very quickly answer that. I think we have a mindset issue in this country. We should not forget the fact that although we may be comparatively a poorer country to many Western jurisdictions, when it comes to the digital space, we are not really far off in terms of being in oblivion. Just take a statistical analysis. Yes, qualitatively, the digital transactions in the US may be far bigger, more valuable in terms of money, etc., as compared to India. But quantitatively, India and China really score over the United States of America in terms of the digital society that we have. Just a quick example, we are 135 crore people, plus minus. We have 128 crore mobile phones registered in this country, whereas US has 32 crore mobile phones registered in its country. Just look at broadband and narrowband, the internet access. India has about 68 crore internet access connections operational in the country, out of which 62 crore internet connections are broadband and only 6 crore internet connections are narrowband. Compare that to US. US has only 32 crore internet connections which are operational in the US. So what are we talking of digital divide here? You have twice as much internet connections operating in this country with as much data flowing in this country as compared to the United States of America. Yes, When it comes to 130 crore people and 68 crore, yes, there is of course that difference. But therefore, I will come to that issue. Now, when we talk of technological enabling the justice dispensation system, you are not talking of supplanting the court system in terms or supplementing the court system, supplanting the system and putting in a virtual court. You are only talking of supplementing existing justice delivery systems to make them a little more efficient through an electronic virtual platform as well. I am not saying that courts therefore should not physically sit.
Yeah.
What I am saying is that we may reach a day soon where a particular court will convene at a particular location.
Yeah.
It might have 100 matters on its list. It may choose to hear 50 matters in the physical space because 50 lawyers can come. The remaining 50 matters can be heard in the virtual space, which brings in social distancing, which brings in the fact that you don't have overcrowded infrastructure. You don't have to build bigger behemoths and bigger buildings. In the existing structure, you can cater to justice dispensation, number one. Number two, qualitatively, I believe that a technological platform may or may not improve justice delivery system. Qualitatively, the judges that we have, the courts that we have, the lawyers that we have, and the kind of litigations that we have will pretty much remain the same. I am not saying that a judgment rendered in a virtual court will be better than the physical court, but I am certainly saying that a judgment can possibly be rendered faster in the virtual court in certain matters as compared to the physical court. One example is electricity. Electricity itself is an intangible commodity. And therefore, most electricity litigation is really also on the intangible space. I should take this example. The Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, almost a few years ago, digitized its entire platform. Filings are digital, arguments are actually on a digital platform, but they were happening in a physical space. Now that COVID occurred, they simply moved the hearing part of it to an online platform, which means end-to-end it is digital. Now, if a commission can do it, I fail to understand why every other court can't do it, and I think we are in the right direction.
Perfect. I think that gives us a great cue to jump into some very, very interesting questions we have. So the first question, and I leave for either of you to answer. I think given the number of questions, we'll hear one answer for each question. So maybe I'll ask this question to Sajjan because it affects more back to lawyers. The question is, how will digital courts affect lawyers' style of arguing cases? Many lawyers need physical space to express and articulate themselves fully. And what will it do to, like we know there are lawyers who have an animated style and who are far more effective, in court because of that, who may look to their juniors at the back, which you can't do on a video conferencing. So what is this going to do to the style of lawyering and what skills people need to have?
No, I'll answer that question by saying, have I not been animated in this web conference? Have I not actually done all that I would do possibly in a court? I think the question is that we lawyers have to unlearn the fact that we need to be in a particular physical ecosystem to thrive as lawyers. Yes, I do agree. Even I love the fact that I'm a litigator. I love the fact that in a court hall, in the presence of, let's say, Justice Ravindra Chavan, when he's officiating as a judge, with a brilliant set of lawyers on the other end of the bar, with the interjections, your battle of wits come out, no doubt about it. But that does not mean, of course, the best ecosystem for a lawyer's best to come out is actually a physical courtroom space. But that does not mean that you can't be as or even more effective in the virtual space. Let me take this example. It is like people in the 18th century saying, oh, theater meant that you have to be in a physical space with a physical actor standing on a physical stage with physical props to you to depict. Then came cinematograph, where the physical actor went away, and we realized that cinematographs today are more effective than physical theaters. If a cinematograph can actually communicate to you much better than a physical play where an actor is communicating, why are you telling me that I can't be a better lawyer on the virtual space as compared to the physical space? I believe that the pandemic and the virtual courts will actually lead to super specialization amongst lawyers. If I'm a technology lawyer, I will sit at one location and given technology inputs or do technology lawyering in 5 different courts in different parts of the country more efficiently than having to physically go to each one of them.
Fair enough. No, I love the parallel between cinema and theater, and I think that's very, very akin to the reality we are in. And it's also interesting to hear the birth of potentially a different class of lawyering, who might be able to take advantage of this well. Justice Chavan, to you, I'll direct the next question. Both relate to pendency in a way, and how as we're going online, I think it was alluded in different ways in the conversation where we say some of this can happen faster, but equally you also spoke about in this transition phase how things are actually moving slower. So the question is, do we really believe if we move out of this transition phase that we will see the efficiency and backlog reducing because we can go into digital courts? What would your bet be on this?
Is the question put by an advocate?
I can't say that.
Okay. So, but you people have been making a study of courts, no?
Mm-hmm.
So, just as lawyers have to wait for their cases to be called out, judges have to wait for longer time for the lawyer to appear, for the brief to be placed before the judge, for the witness to come. So, if you count the wastage of time in a physical court, the wastage of time is huge. In fact, we are the most scarce resource is judge time that we are wasting in a physical court. In a e-court, in a virtual court, the schedules will be there. That Advocate Povaiya appears at this time. So these things will help in better utilization of judge time. Secondly, in a physical court, there are many limitations. For example, the shuffling of papers, finding out something from the file. Now, when you have a laptop before you and when the file is in a digital format, you just key in the word and you get the particular page. You don't have to shuffle pages. So search becomes faster, isn't it? So I suppose with use of technology, the pendency may come down. We'll be able to use the judge time more efficiently. Now see what is happening today. Yesterday, Justice Chandrachud inaugurated Virtual Court 2.0 at Delhi. You must have read it in the newspapers or on the TV. So yesterday, when the inauguration took place, that is when that click of mouse started working on the virtual court, till the function was over, till the inaugural function was over, 97 persons had pleaded guilty before the virtual judge, and fine of 97,000 rupees has been collected in about 45-50 minutes. So see, what happens is we are wasting judge time on things which are meaningless. We are wasting say 10-20 magistrates on hearing these traffic challans or small matters. So one judge can do that. So therefore, I suppose if we used technology, we will be able to reduce the pendency. Justice,
that's actually very valuable to hear, because you're talking about especially small, many of the typical civil cases, traffic cases, etc. And, maybe even there are maybe entire classes of cases it can help. But I think this is one thing that it'll depend a lot on how it is done as much as what the idea is. So what I'm hearing from the conversation is we'll need to wait to watch to see if it can happen. But our bets are that it can if done well and correct. There's one more interesting question that I think we'll have the time to take. And this is coming, actually two. I'm going to try taking both because we've answered the technology divide to some extent before we came into this. The question is around the classification right now in most courts around urgent matters, what is urgent and what is not urgent. Is that too subjective right now? Is non-listing and online video conferencing case amount to denial of justice? So I'd love to hear either of your views on that in terms of what you have seen, because there isn't jurisprudence around what is urgent or not, and this is emerging through the pandemic. So would love to hear, is that just a transitionary phase? And if yes, what is the best way to go about it?
If I can take that very quickly, I think we are being very harsh to judge the system even before the system can actually play itself out. The entire process in most courts on what is urgent, what is not urgent is today really in the transitionary phase. I don't think any court has actually now laid down rules or amended, for example, any high court has amended its rules in terms of making a classification of emergent matters or not emergent matters. It is really left to the discretion, so to speak, maybe to some extent at the registry level, and to some extent at the court's level itself, the court saying that, okay, I think this is urgent, I will take it up. So let's not judge the system simply because today we don't have a great set of protocols on what is urgent and what is not urgent. But what we should remember is we are not looking at online courts only to hear urgent matters in the future. Urgent matters hearing at present is only the first step towards a transition towards having a digital space for justice dispensation. So once you have a digital space which will supplant the physical space, then the question of what is urgent, what is not urgent will automatically be taken care of. So my thought process is, I think at least the lawyer community should really push entirely and put its might behind the fact that we can, in this country, given the technological advances we have done in the information technology domain, we can in this country have a seamless transition towards an effective online court system which will supplant the physical court system.
Thank you. And I'll ask one more question before we wrap, which is a very interesting one, which is, if cases move online, is there a need for synchronous sessions? So much of the court's hearing, is there a need for synchronicity? So in the sense, today, like the way the entire court works, which is around saying the judge, the two lawyers, maybe the witness and parties have to be there at the same place at the same time. Is it possible with digitization that we don't even need for it to be synchronous? Can you move to asynchronous hearings, which is to say, can someone send a recorded, that's how I'm understanding the question, to say, can you send a recorded video for certain maybe class of matters in advance, or can it just go to being heard on a written argument? So I think they're asking the question of, because so much of the court time goes into coordinating, can that be done away with, which is such a foundation to the court process?
I am a traditionalist there, and I'll give you my view. I don't think there is the right answer, but I have a very strong view on that. Under our constitutional scheme, public hearing is one of the most important aspects of a hearing, and therefore our courts necessarily must remain and retain that public character. And in a public hearing, events must occur simultaneously at a particular location for that justice dispensation to be effective. You know, doing this non-synchronous hearing or recorded hearings, etc., where files are transferred in terms of recorded messages to a judge, may actually affect the qualitative justice dispensation, not the quantitative bit of it. Therefore, a platform must be developed where, although people may physically be in different locations, they can all congregate on a common platform and have a synchronous hearing before a judge as if it is a physical hearing. It is not too difficult. But I would, as a lawyer, completely vote against a non-synchronous or a non-analogous hearing, if I can call it so, where arguments of the plaintiff are recorded and sent, arguments for the defendant is recorded and sent, and a judge sitting in somewhere in peace and tranquility will look at hear these two and make up his mind. I don't think that's the concept of a public court. That's not the concept of public justice dispensation. That's my view, but I will yield to what Justice Chavan will say, because he has been a judge and his experience far outlives mine by many lives.
I really hope I've understood the question correct. I must confess, I've interpreted that question. I hope I've understood it correct. Yeah.
I entirely agree with the senior advocate. See, what happens is, suppose you send a hearing, suppose you send a file, video file, your arguments. Where is the guarantee that I have actually seen it? There was a long ago, when physical hearings were taking place in Bombay High Court, editor of very popular daily newspaper, Lok Saptah, that is the Express group of newspapers, he published a editorial saying blind and deaf judges. Some judge had such a big number of his eyeglasses, whether he read it or not, people did not know. And somebody was hard of hearing, he would simply switch off his hearing aid. He was punished. The editor was punished for that contempt because it was not correct on his part. But then this can happen, no? If the judge does not actually hear you, what is the guarantee? And as Advocate Povaiya said, public hearings is an important thing. We will not just hear two advocates simultaneously, not simultaneously, one after the other in the same digital space, but also make it available to public. What is happening in the court again could be available to public, so that the essentials of public hearing, open court, are maintained, which is very important. Because otherwise, no, what happens is
I think that's a very, very valuable point. Some critical principles cannot be compromised, whether we are online or offline. And this has been like a very, very enriching experience, educative at multiple levels. Just to conclude, part of what emerged from the conversation.
So before you conclude, I have to thank both of you, you as well as Advocate Povaiya, for taking me that we are on proper track. Okay. So we are moving in proper direction. Thank you.
Glad to hear that. And thank you both, Justice Chavan and Sajan. This was like a very, very enriching conversation. There were many takeaways, everything from recognizing that it was not the pre-COVID world had access. There are going to be challenges in how we do this, but it's important we build foundational capabilities as much as we're talking about, hearings and filings. We're not talking about polarities of going from one extreme to the other. This might create need us to step up to play different roles, create new opportunities for lawyering, new opportunities for how judging might happen, hopefully improve if done well and right. I think that's the big critical component of it. And it's great to hear that courts are moving on or thinking a lot on these lines. It can hopefully really improve access to courts from being physical spaces to including everybody. We just love to wrap up this session by also announcing that a moment like these require more than ever each of us to innovate and to think about how our systems can look different in the coming months and years to come. And in that context, as Agami, we are more than really excited to announce the Agami Prize that we will be opening up for applications in mid-June. And in honor of Shamnad, we're going to be naming, there are going to be 3 categories for the award. One is around for people innovating in the industry dimension, and then people innovating in the citizenship category and early stage ideas. So if any of you are working on justice innovations, whether you're at an early stage or at an advanced stage, please do apply. And the Citizenship Prize is going to be named in honor of Shamnad Bashir. So it's going to be called the Shamnad Bashir Citizenship Prize. So nominations and applications open up on 15th. Stay tuned and do apply, because we need everyone. Everyone innovating counts now more than ever. Thank you all for tuning in. And we have our next session happening at 5 p.m. today on how we can move from conflict to collaboration, resolving disputes online. What I can promise you is that they are going to be doing the most unusual thing. They're having a skit and a theatrical one and not a regular panel discussion. So tune in. Everyone is experimenting and innovating in how Charcha happens. So tune in for the session at 5. Thank you.